They say blood is thicker than water, but my blood tried to drown me. I'm Jessica Randall, born in 1951 in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Back when I was just 7 years old, my older brother Tony started putting his hands where they didn't belong. Today, at 73 and finally safe in my own home, I'm sharing this because silence kills more dreams than truth ever could. If you're listening, drop your location below and please hit that subscribe button. This story needs to be heard. The first time Tony touched me, I was playing with my dolls on the wooden floor of our cramped bedroom. Mama was hanging laundry outside, and Daddy was at the mill like always. Tony was 14 then, already tall and strong like Daddy, with those same cold blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. "Come here, little sister," he whispered, and something in his voice made my stomach twist. When I tried to pull away, he grabbed my wrist so tight it left purple fingerprints. "You tell anyone about our special games, and Daddy will beat you worse than he beats Mama," he hissed. I believed him because I'd seen Daddy's belt leave welts on Mama's back when she burned his dinner. Years crawled by like wounded animals. Tony's games got worse, more painful, more shameful. He'd corner me in the barn, in the cellar, anywhere Mama and Daddy couldn't see. "This is what brothers and sisters do," he'd lie, his breath hot and sour against my ear. I tried telling Mama once when I was 10, showing her the bruises on my thighs. She looked at me with such fear in her eyes, then slapped me hard across the face. "Don't you ever speak such filth again," she sobbed. "Tony's a good boy. You're just confused." But I saw how she watched him after that, how she'd find excuses to keep me busy when he was around. She knew. She just couldn't face the truth. Daddy worshipped Tony like he was some kind of golden prince. Tony could do no wrong in his eyes, star of the high school football team, popular with all the girls, destined for greatness. Meanwhile, I was just another mouth to feed, another burden in a house already drowning in poverty and rage. When Daddy drank, which was most nights, he'd rant about how Tony was going to make something of himself, how he'd lift the Randall name out of the dirt. "But you," he'd point at me with his bottle, "you're just like your worthless Mama. Good for nothing but making babies and keeping house." The night everything changed. I was 14 and Tony was 21. He'd been drinking with Daddy, celebrating some job he'd gotten at the lumber yard. I was washing dishes when he cornered me in the kitchen, his hands rougher than ever, his eyes wild with alcohol and something darker. "You're growing up real nice, little sister," he slurred, pressing me against the sink until the edge cut into my back. What happened next? I can't speak those details, but 9 months later, I was holding a baby boy with Tony's eyes and Daddy's stubborn chin. When my belly started showing, Daddy flew into a rage like I'd never seen. "Who was it?" he screamed, his belt already in his hand. "Which boy ruined you?" I couldn't tell him the truth, not because I was protecting Tony, but because I knew Daddy would kill me before he'd believe his precious son could do such a thing. So I stayed silent while he beat me, while he called me every name in the book, while he dragged poor Jimmy Patterson from down the road and accused him of being the father. Jimmy was just 16, sweet and shy, and he cried when Daddy threatened to have him arrested. "I never touched her, Mr. Randall," he pleaded. "I swear on my mama's grave." Mama delivered my baby in our bedroom while Daddy paced the kitchen, muttering about shame and disgrace. Tony wasn't even home. He'd gotten himself a girlfriend in town and was spending most nights at her place. When little Charles took his first breath, I looked into those familiar blue eyes and felt something break inside me. This innocent child would never know the truth about his father. I'd make sure of that. The months that followed were the darkest of my life. Daddy made me wear loose dresses and stay inside so the neighbors wouldn't see my shame. He told everyone I was sick, that I needed rest. But at night, when Charles cried, it was Tony who'd come to help, his hands still wandering, his whispers still threatening. Our little secret's getting bigger, he'd laugh, bouncing Charles on his knee. Looks just like Daddy, doesn't he? The sight of my brother holding my son, his son, made me physically sick. I tried running away twice. The first time, I made it to the bus station with Charles bundled in my arms, but I had no money and nowhere to go. The second time, I got as far as the next county before the sheriff brought me back. Daddy locked me in my room for a week after that, sliding food under the door like I was some kind of animal. "You'll stay put until you learn some sense," he growled through the wood. But God works in mysterious ways, and sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Mrs. Laura Wilson, the mayor's wife, had been watching our family with growing concern. She was a refined woman in her 50s, always dressed in pearls and pressed dresses, the kind of lady who organized church bake sales and charity drives. I'd seen her around town, but never imagined she'd notice a girl like me. One afternoon, while I was hanging laundry behind our house with Charles strapped to my chest, she appeared at our back fence like an angel in disguise. "Jessica," she called softly, her voice gentle but urgent. "I need to speak with you." I looked around nervously, knowing Daddy would tan my hide if he caught me talking to outsiders about family business. "I know what's happening in that house," she continued, her eyes filled with a compassion I hadn't seen in years. "I've been watching, and I have connections. There's a boarding house in Washington, D.C. run by a woman who helps girls like you. Would you be willing to leave all this behind?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "I can't," I whispered, bouncing Charles as he fussed. "Daddy will find me. He'll drag me back, and then—" I couldn't finish the sentence, but Mrs. Wilson understood. She reached through the fence and touched my hand, her skin soft and warm. "Not if you disappear completely," she said. "New name, new life, new beginning. I have money saved, and I know people who can help. But you have to trust me, and you have to be ready to leave everything behind forever." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Daddy's snores and Tony's footsteps creaking across the floor. Charles slept peacefully beside me, his tiny fist curled around my finger. Could I really do it? Could I take my baby and vanish into the night like smoke? The thought terrified me, but staying terrified me more. I thought about what kind of life Charles would have here, growing up in this house of secrets and shame. Would Tony hurt him too? Would Daddy turn him into another version of himself? The questions ate at me like acid. 3 days later, Mrs. Wilson slipped me a note during Sunday service. "Tomorrow night, midnight, Old Oak Tree by Miller's Creek. Bring only what you can carry." My hands shook as I tucked the paper into my Bible. After church, Tony cornered me in the parking lot, his grip tight on my elbow. "You've been acting strange lately," he said, his eyes narrowing. "You better not be planning anything stupid." You know what happens to girls who try to run from their family. But for the first time in my life, I looked him straight in the eye and didn't flinch. I'm not planning anything, I lied smoothly. Where would I go with a baby? The next night felt like the longest of my life. I waited until the house fell silent, then carefully packed a small bag with Charles's clothes and my few precious belongings. Mama's wedding ring, a photo of my grandmother, and the $23 I'd saved from selling eggs. Charles seemed to sense something was different. He stayed quiet as I bundled him in blankets and crept through the house like a ghost. Every creaking floorboard sounded like thunder in my ears. Mrs. Wilson was waiting by the oak tree with a car I'd never seen before, driven by a man she introduced only as a friend. "This is it, Jessica," she whispered, pressing an envelope into my hands. "There's enough money for train tickets and a month's rent. Mrs. Margaret Thompson runs the boarding house. She's expecting you. Your new name is Jessica Miller, and Charles is your son from a marriage that ended tragically. Can you remember that?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. She smiled sadly. "Because every woman deserves a chance to write her own story." The train ride to Washington, D.C. took 18 hours, and every mile felt like a year lifting off my shoulders. Charles slept most of the way, and I watched the Tennessee mountains fade into rolling hills, then flat farmland, then finally the sprawling cityscape of the nation's capital. I'd never seen so many buildings, so many people, so much life buzzing in every direction. For the first time since I could remember, I felt hope flickering in my chest like a candle flame. Mrs. Thompson's boarding house was a 3-story brick building in a quiet neighborhood, filled with women who'd all fled something: bad marriages, worse families, or simply the suffocating expectations of small-town life. She was a sturdy woman in her 60s with kind eyes and calloused hands, and she took one look at me and Charles and said, "Welcome home, dear. You're safe now." I cried for 3 days straight, mourning the life I'd left behind and celebrating the one stretching out before me. I found work at a local diner, serving coffee and pie to government workers and tourists. The tips were good, and slowly, painfully, I began to build something that belonged to me. Charles grew into a bright, curious boy who called Mrs. Thompson Grandma Maggie and charmed everyone in the boarding house with his gap-toothed grin. Mr. Robert, an elderly gentleman who lived on the second floor, became like a grandfather to him, teaching him to play chess and telling him stories about the war. Years passed like pages turning in a book. I never heard from my family again, and I made sure they never heard from me. Sometimes I wondered if they even looked for us, or if they were relieved to have their shameful secret disappear into the night. I built Charles a life filled with love and laughter, far from the shadows that had haunted my childhood. He never knew the truth about his father, and I pray he never will. Now, at 73, I'm finally ready to break the silence that protected us, but also imprisoned me. If my story helps even one person find the courage to escape their own nightmare, then every painful memory was worth preserving. Please, if you're listening and you're trapped in your own darkness, know that there is light ahead. There are people who will help, doors that will open, and futures that can be rewritten. Sometimes the greatest revenge against those who hurt us is simply surviving, thriving and refusing to let their darkness define our light.